Rahm Emanuel once said, "Never let a crisis go to waste." On today's episode, we'll discuss the following: how a Brexit could cause the introduction of an EU army, then proceeding to the ultimate goal of a world army, and finally, a new world order being established. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. Today, let's get right into it. I assure you this is not advertiser friendly on this video here. There's so much to cover, but I just want to touch on a few points from each. Let's begin with the Attorney General announcing at the United Nations that her office would be working in several American cities to form what she called the Strong Cities Network, a law enforcement initiative that would encompass the whole globe. Okay? Now read the title of this article. They're announcing a global police force. What have we heard about this previously? A global police force is a loss of sovereignty for everyone. The belief is that if you have a global entity, there can be no war between those nations. But this is not the way it works, because the war is fought between people and corporations. Anybody who doesn't see that is unaware of the truth. Let's begin here looking at these images. When you see United Nations vehicles on the Virginia Interstate 81, UN tactical vehicles with bulletproof glass, this individual saying, "You have no idea how many I passed today." What in the world are so many of these vehicles rolling down the streets for? And this isn't the first instance of this. What about all of these other military vehicles that are ending up in all of these small towns across the US? What about all the training that's being done on cities and mock cities, in fact, within major cities, in fact, where you have helicopters coming down right into people's backyards practically? They're hearing explosions, they're hearing gunshots, they're hearing everything. They're freaking out. They're seeing black helicopters everywhere with no announcements. They are training for something. There's something bigger going on than your local government. People think, they're doing their 9-to-5 bills and this and that. And all they're worried about, they're very closed-minded, they don't have time, at least that's what they're saying, to look out a little further. When you have UN vehicles rolling down your streets, we have a big problem. This right here is huge. Let's get into it. The latest EU foreign policy document titled Global Strategy, calls for an extended reach into new spheres as distant as the Middle East and sub-Saharan Africa. They want to move out and branch out just like Obama has done using the military in the US. It also outlined a gradual synchronization and mutual adaptation between different member states' individual defense strategies. What are we looking at here? We're looking at another global army being put into place. The latest plans, we're looking at the bottom here, the latest plans which reveal how the EU wants autonomy in defense and security matters were outlined by the foreign policy chief. The Brussels document said, European security and defense efforts should enable the EU to act autonomously while also contributing to NATO. That's right. We're not giving up on NATO. We just want to build our own thing. That's all. Let us build our own thing. It's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. Look at this. Just 48 hours After David Cameron waved farewell to the EU bureaucrats, Turkish officials landed in Brussels to launch their latest bid. That's right, Turkey wants to enter the EU. Essentially what they're saying is that it's a NATO member, is strategically placed between Europe and Middle East, and it's boasting a vibrant economy, young population, and a little bit of terrorist activity. And so it's saying, look, let Turkey in. Come on, you had all these lobbyists say, look, let Turkey in. You know you want to. Of course, there's probably going to be a lot more money heading in that direction if that's the case, but let's just do it anyway. I think this is huge because you can see strategically, look at a country like Israel, for example, being used in such a way where the U.S. military is essentially the Israeli military as far as I'm concerned, and they are well equipped thanks to the U.S. taxpayers. And that sort of acts as like a satellite, so they can be there, have their presence there for the Middle East and any turmoil that goes on there. Let's move on to this article here. According to a new foreign policy document, the Brussels-based institution to be handed EU's leaders next week, credible European defense is also essential to preserve good relations with the U.S. We're talking about the same document, of course. As Europeans, we must take greater responsibility. The white paper adds, while NATO exists to defend its members, most of which are European, from an external attack, Europeans must be better equipped, trained, and organized to contribute decisively to such collective efforts, as well as to act autonomously if and when necessary. That's right. All the time, because they're all the same talking points. They all have the same leaders controlling them. And this is what we have next. As you look at this article out of the Telegraph, an unpublished position paper drawn up by the European and Defense Policy Committees of Miss Merkel's party that sets out a detailed 10-point plan for military cooperation in Europe. It's understood to closely reflect her thinking and calls for a permanent EU, let me get the highlighter out here, a permanent EU military headquarters, combined weapons procurement, and a shared military doctrine. The countries do not need this. How many times do I have to explain it? You can collaborate on things. You can have joint efforts, but you do not need to sign on the dot in this way. You do not need to share funds. You do not need to do everything that they're planning on doing. You do not need to have an EU army to fight as an EU if you wanted to go in that direction. I don't even agree with the EU as a whole, but you don't need an EU army. But of course, that's not the real reason. They developed this scapegoat, the Mujahideen, back as early as 1979, and that has expanded into what we call ISIS or Daesh or Islamic State or anything else. And of course, this was a creation of the CIA. And today, we feel the effects of that. It's funded by the U.S. taxpayers primarily. And we need an EU army to fight against these extremists, so they say. But as far as I'm concerned, if you just pull away their funding, then they'll disintegrate rather rapidly. But of course, that's not what the goal is. But that's not advertiser friendly either. Let's move on to this article here. We're looking at all of the lies that have been told in the mainstream media. So here we have official documented information, how they're calling for an EU army. You saw that. That's recent information. But if you look not too long ago, in fact, if you're voting for a Brexit because you think the British troops will be called up to an EU army, you're horribly misled. That's right, it's saying, look, don't listen to all those conspiracy theorists. They don't know what they're talking about. There will be no EU army. Have no fear. Yes, there have been calls for it. Yes, there are some white papers and some information. And yes, historically, they have set up the grounds for it. But that's a conspiracy theory. Don't listen to them. Just shut up. Moving on to the next article. Political. Waging war on the myth of an EU army. That's right, the myth of an EU army. Won't even get into it. Basically the same exact information. Let's move on right here. This is out of Sputnik. While the UK seems steadfastly against the proposal, you're looking at Germany's defense minister saying, let me get this highlighter out for you. Our future as Europeans will one day be a European army. That's right. They're calling for a European army all over the place. It isn't just one individual with an idea, a bright idea in his head. This is being called all over the place. Look at this newspaper from back in 1952, and we're looking at the bottom area right here. As you can see this, Ridgeway takes over in Europe, Paris. General Ridgeway came back to France today to take command of the North Atlantic Defense Forces, okay? He's confident that he could make a 14-nation army in Europe. So what they are saying is no different than what they're saying today. Remember, this is 1952 we're talking about. And on the right-hand side, I found it interesting. Pacts create united European army to block the Red aggression. These plans have been laid out for a long time. Sure, they don't have the EU uniform, perhaps. But what they're doing has been going on for quite a while. Look back to 1957 Treaty of Rome. If you don't know what that is, just look it up. These things have been laid out in history for such a long time, and it goes to show you how difficult it is to get through all the red tape, but ultimately how difficult it is to unwind it all. All right, last but not least, there are now more bureaucrats with guns than U.S. Marines. You have seen the billions of bullets being purchased by the Department of Homeland Security. You've seen all of this being set up to be used against the people. They use the scapegoat of the Mujahideen, of Daesh, of ISIS, of Islamic State, of the Caliphate, of Al-Qaeda, any others, Taliban, anything else. Al-Nusra, the Muslim Brotherhood. How many other ones are there out there? And they use that against the people. The entire reason they create it is to generate fear and then use that against the people to take their liberties. The people will unfortunately beg and plead their governments to be subservient, to be slaves. And we see that now more than ever. If you found this video informative, please give me a thumbs up. Last but not least, if you found this video informative, I know you'll find my book, The Money GPS, even more informative. If you want to look through the book, just head over to Amazon where they have a look inside feature, which will allow you to flip through the pages of the book and see if you like it. Take care.